They mailed it to my old address. Not because they didn't have the right one. I'd updated it in the family group chat months ago, right after I moved into my new loft downtown. But that detail, like most details about me, was either forgotten or ignored. The invitation arrived 2 weeks late, forwarded from my old mailbox, with a coffee stain in one corner and a tear in the envelope where the seal had come undone. The handwriting was Juliet's. I recognized the sharp loops in the J, the little heart over the I. She'd always been the expressive one. The performer. The one who'd send birthday cards in pink gel pen and doodle stars in the margins of grocery lists. The card was white, thick, embossed in rose gold letters. Juliet and Connor join us for a weekend of celebration and love Napa Valley. And at the bottom in tiny type, guest of honor, Leah Anders. +1, not included. It wasn't a mistake, it was just typical. There was no handwritten note. No hope you can come, Lee. No can't wait to see you. Just my name typed in block print on the RSVP card, Miss Leah Anders. Table, TBA. I sat on the edge of my couch, invitation in hand, and stared at that small line for a long time. Not because I was surprised, but because, somehow, I always let it surprise me anyway. My name had always been at the edge of things. On the corner of group photos. On the envelope, but not in the note. In the room, but never in the spotlight. Even as kids, Juliet was the one with the solo in the spring musical, while I ran the lights backstage. She was the one who got a banner when she got into her college. I got a text that said, "That's great." When I got into mine, I remember bringing home a regional science trophy when I was 16, placing it on the kitchen counter, only for Mom to say, "Honey, can you move that? I don't want it scratching the marble." It wasn't cruelty, it was habit. Juliet sparkled, and I kept things running quietly in the background. That used to bother me. But these days, I'd built a life around it. A company, actually. In cybersecurity. Irony, right? A whole career in staying unseen and protecting what others don't realize is vulnerable. My startup had grown quietly, efficiently, exponentially. We just secured Series C funding, closed a government contract, and made it onto a 30 under 40 list. I didn't post about it. I didn't expect flowers. But somewhere deep in me, I think I still wanted the people who mattered to notice. Instead, I got an RSVP card with my name misspelled, Leah Anders, and a checkbox for chicken or fish. I ticked the fish. I didn't bring a +1, I didn't correct the spelling. What was the point? Juliet had always been the center of the family solar system. Her wedding would be no different. I'd show up. I'd wear something tasteful and quiet. I'd smile when it was appropriate. I'd sit at whatever table they assigned me, toast when told, and vanish before the after-party. I didn't go to be seen. Not then. But the thing about shadows is, when the light shifts just right, even the quiet ones get noticed. I always sat in the backseat. Literally, yes, but also in every other way that mattered. At family dinners, Juliet got the center chair next to Dad. On holidays, she handed out the presents. During road trips, she rode shotgun and controlled the playlist. Me, I was behind her, behind everyone. But when you sit in the backseat long enough, you learn how to watch. You pick up things others miss. The glances, the silences, the way approval bends towards certain people and skims past others like wind through an open window. Juliet was sunshine. I was the shade behind her. She got straight A's in English and stood on the coffee table to recite monologues from Shakespeare while our relatives clapped. I won the state math Olympiad at 16, brought home a trophy nearly as tall as I was. No one clapped. Mom told me to be careful with it because it might scratch the hardwood floor. That was the end of it. I remember the day Juliet got her college acceptance letter from Emerson. Mom screamed. Dad opened a bottle of sparkling cider. My grandparents drove over with balloons. There were Instagram stories, a dinner party, a cake. When my own letter came from MIT, on a full scholarship, no less, I told them over breakfast. Juliet was talking about a guy she met at a party. Mom said, "That's great, sweetie," without looking up from the scrambled eggs. And it was fine. That's the thing. When enough of those moments stack up, they stop stinging and start settling. You build around them like roots growing around a stone, stronger, more winding, but always shaped by it. In college, I stopped trying to win their attention and started winning on my own terms. I coded through winter breaks while Juliet traveled to Greece with friends. I interned at a defense firm while she posted selfies on boats with champagne in hand. She called me a workaholic once. I called it freedom. I built a life where no one got to tell me I was too much or not enough. I graduated early, launched my company out of a shared office space with peeling linoleum, and bootstrapped it from nothing. No one in my family asked what I was working on, but that was okay. By then, I'd stopped needing them too. Still, the habits of childhood have a way of trailing after you, like a smell on old clothes or a song you can't forget the words to. Even now, as an adult, I find myself shrinking in certain rooms, especially when they're filled with people who knew me when I was the quiet one, the odd one, the girl who fixed the internet but couldn't hold a conversation, the girl who always sat behind Juliet. Sometimes I wonder if I chose cybersecurity because it meant I could stay hidden but still be powerful. Unseen, but essential. Sometimes I wonder if that's what I'd been trying to prove all along. The week before Juliet's wedding, Mom called me. "You're still coming, right?" she asked, almost as an afterthought. Juliet really wants everything to go smoothly. I said yes. There was a pause. "Just don't wear anything too flashy, okay?" she added. "This is her day." I bit my lip. I wasn't planning to. "I know, sweetie. You've always had good taste. Just, you know how Juliet gets." "I do, I always have." What she really meant was, "Don't make this about you." What I heard was, "Stay in the backseat." And maybe, for one last time, I was still willing to do that, or so I thought. The vineyard looked like something out of a magazine. Rows of silver-leafed vines stretching toward the horizon, lanterns strung between oak trees, and a long table dressed in ivory linen at the crest of a hill. Everything was glowing. Everything was curated. Everything was perfect. I arrived just after the sun began to dip behind the hills. A valet in suspenders took my rental car without asking my name. I wasn't surprised. I didn't look like anyone important. I wore a simple navy sheath dress, pearl studs, and low heels. Clean lines, no noise, no distractions. The coordinator handed me a place card as I walked up the path. It was printed in cursive on soft cream stock. Leah Anders, table 12. I stopped walking. Read it again. Leah, not Lee, not my name, just like the invitation envelope, just like the RSVP, the mistake that never got corrected, the typo that had turned into identity. I didn't say anything. There was no one to say it to. I just kept walking toward table 12, which was tucked in the back corner near the side of the house, partially blocked by a topiary. It was the only table not under the string lights. The people already seated looked vaguely familiar. An aunt I hadn't seen since 8th grade, a family friend from church, a guy I couldn't place. They nodded politely. I smiled and took my seat, folding the name card neatly in half and sliding it under my plate. Out of sight. Just like me. Juliet floated by soon after, radiant in a blush silk cocktail dress. She greeted our aunt with air kisses, posed for a selfie, and then finally looked at me. "You made it," she chirped. Her voice was high and bright like champagne bubbles. "I did," I said. "Thanks for the invite." She leaned in quickly, not a hug, just a performative lean. "You look great. Very appropriate," she said, eyes flicking down my dress. "Not too formal, not too casual. You nailed it." I gave a small smile. Glad I passed inspection. Juliet didn't catch the edge in my tone. She never did. She turned to the others at the table. "This is my sister, Leah." "Lee," I corrected. She blinked. "Right, sorry. I just see it written that way on everything and well, you know." "No, I didn't." She was already walking away before I could say anything else, laughing with a bridesmaid, sliding seamlessly back into her orbit. Dinner was served, the wine flowed, toasts were made. I didn't speak much. No one asked what I did for a living. One man asked if I worked in Juliet's industry, and I said no without elaborating. The woman next to me told me her daughter was starting a blog. "You should connect," she said. "You look like someone who's good with computers." Later, during the cocktail hour on the patio, I wandered near the fountain and caught a glimpse of Juliet with her new in-laws. They were all gathered in a loose circle, laughing, sipping wine, dressed in whites and creams and expensive jewelry that sparkled in the firelight. I stayed back, observing, like always. That's when I saw him, Robert McKinley, father of the groom. Gray hair, angular suit, watch that probably cost more than my rent. He glanced my way for half a second. No smile, no nod, no recognition. Then he turned back to Juliet and said something. I didn't hear it clearly, just the tail end. "She's a bit rough around the edges, that sister. Not surprised she came alone." Juliet said nothing. She didn't correct him. She didn't defend me. She just shrugged. As if that was all I deserved. I stood by that fountain for a long time after they walked away. The string lights above me buzzed softly. My name, misspelled and forgotten, echoed somewhere in the hollow part of my chest. And I realized something strange. I wasn't angry. Not yet, just tired. Tired of being erased with a smile. Tired of making myself small so others could shine. And in that tiredness, a spark started to glow. Not rage. Not revenge, something quieter. Sharper. Something that would wait and strike, not with noise, but with clarity. The rehearsal dinner was held at a private estate with a view that stretched across all of Napa Valley, rolling hills, neat rows of vines, and a sunset painted in gold. Everything was pristine, perfectly timed, perfectly manicured, except for my name, again, printed on a tent card in the center of my plate, Leah Anders, Table 7. Still wrong, still not worth fixing. I didn't bother mentioning it this time. I simply flipped the card over and tucked it beneath the charger plate like a scrap of trash. Maybe that's what it was meant to be. I sat alone at the table for a while, sipping water with lemon, watching guests trickle in. Juliet was fluttering between groups, hugging, posing, laughing. She looked like a bride in a movie. And maybe she was. Maybe the whole night was a film, and I was just the background extra who wandered too close to the camera. Eventually, others joined my table, groomsmen, distant relatives, a startup guy with gelled hair who talked loudly about crypto until he got bored of me not responding. And then he arrived. Robert McKinley, Juliet's soon-to-be father-in-law, the man who had looked through me like smoke the night before. The man whose voice I had heard, slicing through my dignity like glass. He sat across from me, adjusted his cufflinks, checked his phone. He didn't look up. For a moment, I thought, maybe he won't say anything. Maybe he'll just eat and ignore me again, but fate has a funny sense of humor. He glanced up and made brief eye contact, his brow furrowed. "Are you one of the support staff?" he asked, gesturing vaguely to my seat, to my plain navy dress, to my silence. I blinked. "Excuse me." "You look familiar," he added. "From the event last night, thought you might have been with AV or catering." I stared at him, my fork hovered above my salad untouched. My glass glistened in the light, my pearls were real, so was my restraint. "I'm Leah Anders," I said quietly, "Juliet's sister." His face didn't change. "Oh," he said after a pause, as if he were digesting something unimportant. "Right, she mentioned a sister, you're the tech one." I nodded once. That was all he got. "Interesting field," he muttered, though not exactly dinner conversation. And just like that, he turned his gaze back to his phone, done with me. I sat there perfectly still, a beat, too. The crypto guy next to me cleared his throat. Tough crowd. I smiled without showing my teeth. The meal came and went. Conversations swirled around me like wind I couldn't step into. They talked about hedge funds, destination properties, litigation wins, a winery merger in Sonoma. I knew half the people they name-dropped. Some had tried to poach my team. Others had sent offers I turned down. But no one asked what I did. Not really. I was the tech sister. The quiet one, the invisible one, until Robert started talking again, this time louder, fuller, bolder. His voice bounced across the linen tablecloths like a speech he'd practiced. "We just finalized a huge round," he said proudly, addressing the entire table. "Invested in a company called Quantex AI, Cutting-edge cybersecurity, machine learning protocols, the works. It's going to be massive, disruptive. Honestly, probably going to knock a few of the big players out of the game. I lowered my water glass slowly. My stomach went still. Quantex? That name wasn't just familiar, it was personal. They were under federal investigation for code theft from us. My company, Lumina Defense, had built that protocol. Proprietary, patent pending. We had the time-stamped logs, the digital trail. The legal complaint was already in the hands of our counsel. Quiet, strategic, calculated. Robert didn't know that. He was boasting. Loudly, blindly. They're building a model that'll leave everyone else in the dust, he went on, grinning. I've got a front row seat. I felt something tighten in my chest, not fury, not spite, just precision. The kind of silence that hums before a blade drops. I looked across the table at him and I smiled. A small, patient, surgical smile. I didn't speak yet. Not yet. But I could feel the mountain peak rising just ahead. And I was no longer sitting in the backseat. He was still talking about Quantex AI, about proprietary systems, about next-gen cyber dominance, about how his firm had cornered the market. Robert McKinley spoke with the smugness of a man who believed he knew everything and had never once been told otherwise. Around the table, people nodded politely. Some looked impressed. Others looked like they were pretending to be. Juliet laughed once, delicately, when he said, "If Quantex does what I think it can, we're talking billion-dollar valuation by spring." I took another sip of water. Still, I didn't say a word. Not yet. Let him talk. Let him build his mountain. I wanted him to be standing at the very top when it crumbled. And then, right after a long brag about their patent-pending AI firewall that no competitor had come close to replicating, there was a pause. A beat of silence, the kind of hush that waits to be filled. I placed my glass down gently and cleared my throat, not loudly, just enough to be heard. "I wouldn't be so sure," I said. My voice was calm, crisp, surgical. The kind of tone you use when you don't need to prove anything, because the facts are already on your side. The entire table turned toward me. Robert blinked. "I'm sorry." I folded my hands in front of me. About Quantex, I wouldn't be so sure about their future. Not with 3 pending lawsuits alleging intellectual property theft. Someone let out a quiet, "Oh." Robert's eyes narrowed. "That's not public." "It is," I said. "You just haven't been paying attention." He looked confused now, off balance for the first time. "Wait, how would you?" I met his gaze directly. "My name is Leah Anders," I said, "founder and CEO of Lumina Cyber Defense." The fork froze in his hand, his jaw twitched slightly, and then he dropped his wine glass. It hit the marble floor with a sharp, crystalline shatter that echoed across the courtyard. A few heads turned. A server rushed over. No one spoke. Except me. "We filed the primary complaint," I continued evenly. "They used our architecture, word for word in some places. My team discovered the breach 3 months ago. The logs are time-stamped. Our counsel has already escalated the case. We chose not to go public yet, but we will." Silence, complete and utter silence. Robert's face had lost all its color. "You," he stammered. "You're that Leah Anders." "Yes," I said. "The one who turned down your funds offer last year. Conflict of interest, bad ethics, poor due diligence." He didn't respond. He couldn't. The crypto guy next to me suddenly looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. One of the bridesmaids leaned toward Juliet and whispered, "She's that Leah Anders." Juliet's mouth was slightly open. For the first time in years, she looked like she had no lines prepared. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply existed in full view, and for once that was enough. The server cleaned up the glass. A new wine was poured, but the table didn't recover. Not really. The rest of the evening moved in hushed, broken conversation. No one asked me if I wanted dessert. No one mispronounced my name again. Juliet avoided eye contact. Robert excused himself early. I stayed for another 15 minutes, then stood quietly and left the table. As I walked away, I passed a couple from another table. The woman nudged her partner. "That's the sister," she whispered. "The CEO, the one who." I didn't catch the rest, didn't need to, because for the first time in a very long time, they weren't talking about Juliet. The next morning, the energy had shifted, not dramatically, not in the way a chandelier crashes or a fight breaks out during speeches, but in the subtle, unmistakable way people look at you differently when they finally realize what you were always carrying. At breakfast, someone from the groom's side held the door for me and called me Ms. Anders. A groomsman who'd barely said 2 words the night before asked if I had a business card. Even the front desk concierge, who had previously addressed me with a clipped "ma'am," now added, "Is there anything else we can assist you with today, Ms. Anders?" No one mentioned the broken wine glass. No one mentioned Quantex. But I saw the headlines on a finance blog later that morning. Whistleblower case threatens promising AI firm backed by McKinley Capital. I didn't click on it. I didn't need to. The wedding was that afternoon. It was a picture-perfect vineyard ceremony. Juliet looked stunning, of course, her dress cascading like silk water, her veil fluttering in the valley breeze. She smiled through the whole thing. She beamed. But I noticed she never once looked toward me, not during the vows, not during the kiss, not during the recessional. At the reception, I found my name card at a new table, this time spelled correctly. Leah Anders, table 3. Near the front, near the action. No one said why the change had been made, but everyone seemed to know. I didn't stay long. After the speeches, before the dancing started, I stepped outside for air. The vineyard looked golden under the late afternoon sun. The hills rolled like sleeping giants. Everything felt soft and still. That's when he appeared behind me. Sam. No, Lee. Robert McKinley. He stood a few feet away, hands clasped in front of him like a penitent student. His voice was different now, measured, almost gentle. "I wanted to say," he began. "You don't have to," I interrupted. Calm, not unkind. "Just efficient." "I do," he said. "Last night, that wasn't how I meant things to go." I turned to face him fully. I didn't flinch. I didn't glare. "I'm not interested in how you meant things to go," I said. "I'm only interested in how they went." He nodded once sharply, no defense, just silence. Then he said, "Business is business, but I respect what you built, and I won't forget this." I lifted my champagne glass slightly. "That's good. Because I'm considering bidding against your firm on that Napa Tech estate you've been circling." His face twitched just once, but it was enough. I smiled, a polite practice smile, not cruel, not victorious, just honest. Purely business, of course. He didn't respond. He turned eventually and walked away. Inside, the music started. Guests clapped. The new couple danced their first dance. Juliet twirled under the lights like a storybook bride. Her world, her spotlight, her applause. I stood at the edge of the patio, watching from the shadows. But this time, the shadows didn't feel like exile. They felt like choice. Later that evening, I slipped away quietly. No big goodbyes. No drawn-out hugs. I gathered my small bag, stepped into the car waiting at the front, and gave the driver a nod. At the airport lounge, I ordered tea and scrolled through my inbox. A message had just come in from our lead counsel. Subject line, Quantex, immediate injunction approved. I smiled, folded the screen shut. Took a slow sip of peppermint tea. I didn't post anything. Didn't tag the location. Didn't text anyone to say, "Did you see this?" Because for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to be loud. I was no longer waiting to be seen. I had been seen, and it wasn't applause I wanted anymore. It was peace. When I got back to Austin, it was raining. Not the dramatic, thunderous kind, just a soft drizzle that turned the sidewalk silver and made the street lamps glow like halos. I stood outside my building for a moment, suitcase in one hand, the other resting lightly on my phone. No messages from Juliet, no calls from my parents, and that, somehow, felt fitting. I rode the elevator to my floor in silence. The hallway smelled faintly of eucalyptus from the diffuser I'd left running. My apartment was just as I'd left it, books neatly stacked, fridge light humming, a half-folded throw on the couch. Nothing here had changed, but I had. I set my bag down, slipped off my shoes, and stood by the window. The skyline shimmered beyond the glass, rain sliding down in delicate rivulets. I could see the blinking red light on my home server across the room. It meant our system had pushed a successful update. Even while I was away, the work continued. The work always did. I walked over to my desk, solid oak, worn at the edges, and pulled out a small box from the drawer. Inside was a brass coin. Smooth, heavy. It bore the logo of Lumina Cyber Defense on one side, and the words we had chosen for our founding motto on the other. Invisible, but indispensable. I'd had the coins made 2 years ago, one for every team member who stayed through the first brutal year of scaling. We hadn't handed them out publicly. They were private reminders of what it took to build something that didn't seek attention, but demanded respect. I turned the coin in my hand. Then I looked up at the corkboard on the wall. On it were sticky notes, small quotes, hand-scribbled reminders. One of them, faded now, read, "Success is not louder than humiliation. It's just steadier." That was something I'd written after being rejected for a panel because I was charismatic enough. Another note next to it had just one word, seen. I'd written that one last night, at the airport, after the email from our legal team. The apartment was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. That evening, I made tea, curled up on the couch with my laptop, and joined our Monday night all-hands meeting via video. My team greeted me with sleepy smiles and banter. "Welcome back, boss," Diego said. "We didn't burn the place down." "I trust you," I replied. "That's why I let you handle the fire." There were updates on the Quantex fallout. News had begun to spread. Investors were backing away. Journalists were sniffing around. One team member reported that a competitor had sent a discreet request to license one of our security modules. "We're not in a rush," I told them. "We move with clarity, not noise." They nodded. They knew. They'd always known. After the meeting, I sat a moment longer. The city outside was still wet, still breathing. I thought of the vineyard, of the table in the corner, of the way Robert McKinley's face fell, of Juliet's silence, and then I let it go. Not because I forgave them, not because I needed closure, but because I didn't want to carry it anymore. They didn't define me, they never had, and now they finally knew it too. The next day, a brown envelope arrived at my office. No return address. Inside was a formal wedding photo, Juliet and Connor under the oak arch, both smiling in perfect symmetry. Tucked behind it was a handwritten card. I recognized the loopy cursive instantly. "Leah, I know this is overdue. I saw you. I really did. Juliet." I placed the card in the drawer, not to treasure it, not to forgive, just to remember. Because sometimes the apology isn't for healing. It's just a footnote in the story you've already rewritten. And I had rewritten mine, not for applause, but for peace.